Jack Johnson's with us. He's never at a loss for words. He is the Senate Majority Leader. He joins us on the Murphy Show hotline to talk about the goings-on of the General Assembly in the great state of Tennessee. Hey, Jack, how are you?
Hey, I'm good, Matt. Good to be back with you.
Well, it's always a pleasure. Let's put one quick drag show question to bed, and then we'll move on. Okay, you ready?
Sure, absolutely.
So, you know you're hitting the right notes when you're making the right dogs howl as you throw a rock into a pack of them. And a lot of people are mischaracterizing this. The New York Times, the Washington Post, #NeverCNN as I call it, they're all saying, oh, Tennessee has banned drag shows. Do you lose a moment of sleep watching as they mischaracterize the bill that came out of the General Assembly?
I really don't, because I have faith and confidence in Tennesseans that know what we are actually trying to do here. We're not banning drag shows. We're not banning pride festivals. If that's something you wish to do, then more power to you. I support your right to do that. We're simply banning sexually explicit entertainment in front of kids. It's that simple. But I do find it curious, Matt, that when we file a bill to say, you know what, you can't do sexually explicit things in front of kids, where is the biggest outcry coming from? It is coming from the drag community. I'm not saying that means anything, but it is curious.
Yeah, it is interesting to me, too, Jack, that I hear them simultaneously howling about the legislation and then telling us that none of this was going on in the state of Tennessee. Well, if none of this was going on in the state of Tennessee, what's your big beef with the legislation?
That's exactly right. If you're not doing it, you shouldn't care about the legislation. But, in fact, we know there's evidence out there that, in fact, it was happening in public places where kids were present, and that's why we needed the legislation. It was common sense, and I'm just proud that the overwhelming majority of Tennesseans support that type of common sense legislation.
You know, some other howling is coming from the city of Nashville with regard to the Council Reduction Act that's swiftly moving through the General Assembly. Where are we on this on the Senate side? Have you guys gotten it passed yet?
We are well on our way. In fact, I was proud to cast the first vote. I was able to cast, first opportunity to cast a vote for that legislation to reduce the size of the Metro Council. Well, let me rephrase, because the senator brought up a good point. We are not saying how big the Metro Council can or should be. We're just putting a cap on it. We're not setting the size of the council. We're just saying it can't be above 20. If they want to make it 10 or 12 or 15, they can certainly do so. But anyway, we had that legislation in the Senate Finance Committee yesterday. It passed overwhelmingly. Should have it on the Senate floor probably next week. And, of course, it's already passed the House, and it will be on its way to Governor Bill Lay. It's good legislation.
And then it does give the city of Nashville the opportunity to decide whether or not they can manage to do this election cycle, or go ahead and vote this election cycle with the current council and do it by next year. Am I right in that?
You are correct. The legislation actually calls for them to do that this year, which is their normally scheduled election cycle, the mayor and all 40, if it was 40, or if it ends up being 20 council seats would be up this year. We put a provision in there that allows them to defer that at their choosing for 1 year if they don't think they can get all of that done and in place. And that was an important piece of the legislation, Matt, because we know that it will probably be challenged in court and will be litigated. And we just didn't want them to have an argument of, well, we can't feasibly get this done. I believe they can. They just went through a redistricting process, as we all did. So they have the numbers, they have the data. They should be able to get this done and have the election this August as it normally would be. But we didn't want that to be something they could hang their hat on in court. So we do allow them, at their discretion, if they're not able to get that done, an additional year.
One of the pieces of legislation, I meant to bring this up right at the beginning as I was kind of joking with you about the quote-unquote drag show bill. The other legislation that had to do with, in some way, the transgender community was the bill that would restrict the ability of any medical centers in the state of Tennessee from performing surgeries on minors that would alter their gender in any way or reassign their gender in any way. And it's good legislation. You and I have talked about it in the past. It's my understanding there's something of a companion piece to this moving through the House of Representatives, and I wonder if it's on your radar screen in the Senate regarding the performing of transgender surgeries anywhere in the United States and how that would affect medical organizations here in the state of Tennessee. I think it's 1215 in the House. Are you familiar with this, Jack?
I am. I am familiar with that legislation, Matt, and it does what you said. It addresses people that we contract with to our managed care organizations who basically run our Medicaid waiver program in the state of Tennessee relative to, now let me be very clear, our Medicaid program does not pay for these surgeries in Tennessee. That they haven't, and they will not do so in the future. So don't want to imply that. But there is legislation relative to their paying for that type of legislation in other states. Now, so it is a House initiative, and it's moving through the House, so we're monitoring it, and we'll see where it ends up in terms of language. Now, just be clear that if an MCO or someone, a managed care organization, via a Medicaid program in another state is doing so, if they are paying for procedures, then they're doing so because the state makes them do that. And so it's a fair conversation to have, and you're right, there is legislation dealing with that.
Yeah, and I don't know where I fall on it, but it is an interesting conversation, because if the organizations in other states are being forced into certain aspects of medical care that they might not want to cover, but those states require them to, is it fair for the state of Tennessee to stop doing business with them as a result? I guess that's a question that is going to have to be addressed about the legislation, right?
It is, and that's the purpose of the legislation. I think it's a productive conversation to have. I and I know you as well. We've had great conversations about state sovereignty and the ability of states to do things as they deem fit, and people that have the opportunity to choose whether or not to live in that state or not. And so it's one of those tightrope things that we have to walk. But I'm glad we're having the conversation about it.
I don't pretend, and I'm going to get into a larger conversation with the listening audience about this coming up at 1 o'clock regarding TikTok. I briefly had TikTok on my phone. I heard a smattering, this is years ago, heard a smattering of the possibility that it was owned by China and they may be using this to collect data or whatever. And so I just got it off my phone immediately, and I've since changed phones. So I feel fairly comfortable that I'm not compromised in whatever way we can be compromised. I'm not really sure I understand quite what China's being accused of doing outside of dumbing down Americans' children, because I've seen some of the TikTok videos and they're pretty dumb. But where should the government involve itself in this? I know AG Skrmetti is discussing the possibility of, he's looking into it. Is the General Assembly looking into the possibility of what they can do to prevent these potential spying mechanisms from infiltrating state government and even on college campuses?
Yes, and we do have legislation. Senator John Lundberg from Bristol, Tennessee, wonderful senator, great friend, has legislation that we've already passed on the Senate floor relative to governmental property, governmental phones, and governmental Wi-Fi systems and higher education campuses. I think that is relevant and the right thing to do on anything that is government issued or government services. Be it, again, you're talking about devices, so there are government employees who have state-issued phones or smartphones. You have obviously governmental Wi-Fi. Some of that is accessible to the public. Some of it is secured. And I think it's reasonable that we say, we're just not going to allow that on any of our systems in state government and higher ed. And we're certainly not going to allow any state-issued phones to have the app on those phones. That I support, and I think it's the right thing to do. At some point, I think we do have to have a degree of personal responsibility. I don't have TikTok on my phone. My kids may. I wish they didn't. And I've told them that they shouldn't. And they're still on mom and dad's cell phone plans, so we probably have a little bit to say about that. But so do you go so far as to, and I don't know, you get into some interstate commerce issues, some constitutional issues, and I know other states are looking at just banning it altogether. And as you said, our Attorney General, and that's a key aspect of this, General Skrmetti is doing an amazing job, and I know he's taking a serious look at it as well.
And it isn't even so much the nature of the content that you see, right? It's my understanding that it's what might be going on. It's almost a Trojan horse situation, that it's not what's on the surface. It's what might happen if you download the app on, for example, a government-issued phone underneath the surface.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not. You're right. I mean, the content. I'm confident. I don't know that I've ever been on TikTok, but I know people who are, and the content is one thing, but you're right. It's more about that infiltration, the ability to spy and retrieve data, personal data, or other things that might be on your particular device. That is of great concern.
Charter schools, where are we on legislation regarding expansion of charter schools?
Sure. So the way our system works now is a charter applicant can apply to a local district. That district has the opportunity to either grant an application for a charter and allow that charter to open into the district, or they can deny that local education agency decision. And that system is working well. I believe that it is. And I've supported allowing that system to play out. I know some of the folks who are serving on that commission that are reviewing these charter applications that have been overturned. There are bills up here that are circulating to make that process a little bit more favorable towards the charter applicants, and I think that's a good conversation to have. We know that there are districts in the state of Tennessee that are just outwardly, blatantly hostile to charters. They just hate them, no matter the good work they do. I toured a charter school in Nashville a month or so ago, and Matt, I'm telling you, it was amazing. These kids, largely from lower socioeconomic standards in terms of their income, largely minority students, and I got to visit with some of those kids and watch them in the classroom, and it was an amazing experience. Why would we not encourage more of that? So the state's role, in my view, is to make sure that every charter applicant is getting a fair hearing, and if they can fulfill a need in a particular district, then that application should be granted. We should not be outwardly hostile towards charter schools.
I know I've got to run, Bell, but I have one more question in me with Jack Johnson, Senate Majority Leader, and it involves the Department of Children's Services. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just we notice when things go wrong. I don't know why it is that every experience that I've had with a family and children's services department, whether it's in the state of Georgia where I grew up, in Alabama, or here in Tennessee, as well functioning as government is, there seems to be issues involving this. And I understand we're dealing with children in crisis oftentimes. What status report can you give us, if any, from the General Assembly perspective about what we can potentially do to shore up some of these issues with DCS?
Well, it's a multifaceted problem, and you're right that we were not doing this well. It's one of the most difficult things that state government has to do, and there's an obligation to do that, and that is when you have to take a child out of their home because of abuse, neglect, whatever the case might be. And sadly, that does happen, and it happens far too frequently for any of us to be comfortable with. But you're taking a child out of a home, putting them in foster care, putting them into state custody. The caseworkers who have to deal with these horrible situations and the things they see day in and day out, as you might imagine, the people who do that, they don't do it for the money. They do it because they're passionate and they love these kids. We weren't paying these people enough. There was tremendous turnover in the department. And so over the last year, 2 years, there certainly has been a recognition from the governor's office on down that we need to turn our sights, our attention to this. It's one of the most important things we do, and we need to do a better job of it. So we're appropriating money. We're going to pay higher salaries. We're giving that department the tools they need to be able to do the job better. And I'm telling, and by the way, we're not just saying, in the next budget. We did a budget amendment for the current fiscal year to get more money. Money's not the answer for everything, but it was a critical component to make sure we can get the right people in there and make sure these kids are taken care of. So we recognized the problem, and we took immediate steps to address it.
Jack, always good to catch up with you. Thank you for your hard work in the General Assembly, and we'll talk again very soon.
Thanks, Matt. Have a great day.
There's Jack Johnson, Senate Majority Leader, joining us for a few moments.